On August 14, 2015, a salvage crew operating 300 miles off the coast of the Azores spotted a silhouette that did not belong to the horizon. It was the Aura, a 34-foot carbon fiber sloop designed for the world's most punishing currents. The hull was bleached bone white by a decade of salt and sun, trailing a beard of gooseneck barnacles that tethered it to the deep. When the crew boarded, they found a vessel frozen in a state of suspended animation. A half-eaten protein bar sat on the navigation table. A heavy weather jacket hung neatly on a peg. In the waterproof locker beneath the chart plotter, they found a Pelican case containing 4 external hard drives and 12 high-capacity flashcards, 80 gigabytes of data, thousands of files, a digital ghost of a man who had been declared dead 10 years prior. Elias Thorne was not an amateur. He was an oceanographer and a veteran solo sailor with 3 Atlantic crossings already recorded in his logbooks. He was a man of checklists and redundancies. His boat was equipped with the latest satellite uplink, dual EP-IRB beacons, and a custom-built solar array. He was the expert victim, a man whose very competence made his disappearance an impossibility. On May 12, 2005, Thorne had cleared the harbor at Charleston, South Carolina, aiming for the coast of Portugal. He was 52 days into his journey when the world lost contact. No distress signal was ever sent. No wreckage was ever found. For 10 years, the case was a void. Now the investigators have the metadata, they have the frames, they have the final seconds of a man who spent his life studying the sea only to be swallowed by its silence. We begin with the evidence log: 1 Nikon D70 digital camera, 1 Sony Handycam, 2 Garmin GPS units. The files on these devices provide a forensic image of a tragedy that defies the laws of maritime survival. As we scrub through the footage, the timestamps become our heartbeat. At 6:14 a.m. on July 3, 2005, Elias Thorne is filmed adjusting the mainsail. He is calm, he is smiling. At 11:42 p.m. that same night, the recordings stop being about the journey and start being about the dark. The first drive contains 30 gigabytes of environmental data. Thorne was tracking a localized thermal anomaly, a patch of water that was significantly colder than the surrounding Gulf Stream. In his journal, found as a PDF on the second drive, he writes, "The sensors are reporting a drop of 12 degrees in 6 minutes. The water is flat, like oil. No wind, no birds. The silence is physical. This is the impossible discovery. Why would a seasoned sailor remain in a dead calm zone when his GPS showed a steady drift of 4 knots in a direction opposite to the prevailing current? The Aura was moving, but it wasn't the wind or the waves doing the work." The quote 5 looks at these coordinates and sees a man being pulled into a geographic trap. The video files from July 4th are fragmented. They show macro shots of the deck, specifically the way the salt crystals began to form in geometric patterns that Thorne describes as quote 6. He records himself holding a compass. The needle spins with a frantic rhythmic stutter. He doesn't look afraid, he looks fascinated. This was his greatest strength, his intellectual curiosity. It would also be his undoing. "It's not a storm," he whispers to the camera at 3 a.m. on July 5th. "It's a subtraction." By the time we reach the 40 gigabyte mark of the archive, the footage shifts to the cabin. Thorne has sealed the hatches. The audio is a low-frequency hum that vibrates the camera lens. Forensic analysis of the audio reveals a sound signature consistent with deep-sea seismic activity, yet there were no recorded earthquakes on that date. The metadata on the final folders is corrupted, suggesting the hardware was exposed to a massive electromagnetic burst. Imagine you are standing in that cabin. You have enough food for 6 months. You have a hull that can withstand a hurricane. You are the most prepared human being on the Atlantic, and yet you are watching your instruments die one by one. The GPS drift intensifies. The Aura begins to accelerate into the fog. The last video file is titled Final Log 070505. It is only 12 seconds long. It shows Thorne standing at the stern, looking not at the water but at the sky. He isn't wearing a life jacket. He isn't holding the tiller. He simply steps out of the frame. The camera continues to record the empty deck for 6 hours until the battery dies. No splash is heard, no struggle. Just the sound of the wind returning to the sails. The mystery of the Aura is not that it survived 10 years at sea. It is that the boat remained in pristine condition while its master vanished in a moment of absolute calm. The evidence log lists his wedding ring on the table. His shoes were placed neatly by the bunk. He didn't fall. He departed. The mountains of the sea do not explain why a man who feared nothing would choose to walk into the white. The digital archive ends in static, a haunting reminder that even 80 gigabytes of truth cannot fill the hole left by a single life. The sea keeps its secrets, and sometimes it returns the vessel just to show us how little we understand the depths. The reconstruction begins not with the man but with the machine. Digital forensics experts spent 18 months stabilizing the jitter in the 80 gigabyte cache. What they found was a man documenting his own erasure. Between July 5th and July 10th, 2005, the Stoan, 12, entered a state of, 13. The coordinates recorded by the primary unit placed the vessel in the middle of the Sahara Desert, while the backup unit insisted they were at the South Pole. This is the, 14 Elias Thorne's notes during this period become increasingly granular. He stops recording his feelings and starts recording the frequency of the light. 15. He types into a notepad file at 2:14 p.m. 16. A man of science, Thorne attempts to rationalize the irrational. He calculates the refractive index of the air. He checks the salinity of the water. He is doing the work of an investigator at his own crime scene. The tragedy lies in this focus. He was so busy measuring the phenomenon that he failed to notice the phenomenon was measuring him. We see a photo taken at 4:11 p.m. It is a macro shot of his own hand. The skin appears translucent. You can see the valves in his veins. He writes, 17. This is the, 18. The belief that understanding a thing grants you protection from it. By the 8th section of the archive, the footage reveals the, 19 wasn't alone. Shadows beneath the surface, larger than any known whale, move in synchronized circles. They don't displace water. They don't create wakes. They are simply absences of light. Thorne films them for 6 hours in total silence. Why didn't he call for help? The radio was functional. The battery levels were at 98%. The answer lies in the journals. He believed he had slipped through a seam in the Atlantic. The final 10 gigabytes of data is composed entirely of audio files. It is the sound of the boat's hull being struck by something rhythmic. It sounds like a heartbeat or a clock. 8:19 a.m., 8:20 a.m., 8:21 a.m. The pacing of the sound never wavers. In the final reconstruction, we see the cabin one last time. It is spotless. The Macan, 21, notes that even in his final moments, Thorne was organized. He had archived the data, placed the drives in the Pelican case, and locked it. He wanted us to find this. He wanted the evidence to survive even if he couldn't. The narrative truth is that Elias Thorne didn't die of exposure or drowning. He was recorded out of existence. The 80 gigabytes of recordings are not a record of a voyage, but a black box for a reality that failed. When you look at the, 23 now, sitting in a dry dock in Lisbon, you don't see a boat. You see a tomb for a man who knew too much about the horizon. The mountains of the sea don't explain why. They only watch. The final file on the final drive is a single image of the horizon, perfectly flat, perfectly empty. There is no boat in the reflection. There is no man. Just the blue. Just the void. We are left with the moral warning. Some secrets are not meant to be measured. To seek the edge of the world is to risk finding it. And on that edge, your preparation is merely a witness to your end. The ocean is not a place, but a memory that forgets us. No signal, no trace, just silence. Every sensor, every log, every redundancy failed to capture the moment the physical became the digital. The, 24 Azores sailed for 3,652 days without a hand on the tiller. It bypassed shipping lanes, it avoided reefs, it behaved as if it were being guided by a ghost that still understood the charts. When the quote 25 finally closes the laptop, the question remains, did Elias Thorne find what he was looking for, or did he simply run out of world? The data ends. The story does not. The sea keeps its secrets. The mountains don't explain why. Imagine you are standing on that deck looking at the silent screen of your GPS, watching the numbers tick down to zero. You are ready. You are prepared. And it doesn't matter, not at all. Silence. Only silence. Under the scrutiny of the Portuguese Maritime Authority, the physical reality of the quote 26 quote began to contradict the laws of physics. They analyzed the barnacle growth. They checked the wear on the rigging. By all accounts, the boat had not aged 10 years. It had aged 10 seconds. The wood was not rotted. The metal was not corroded by a decade of salt spray. It was as if the vessel had stepped out of 2005 and into 2015 in a single blink. This is the quote 27. The investigators found Thorne's wristwatch on the floor. It was still ticking. It was set to 2005. It had not lost a single second. The metadata on the hard drives corroborated this impossibility. The creation dates for the files were sequential, but the internal clock of the hardware had slowed down as the boat moved further into the void. At 4 p.m. on the final day, the hardware recorded a year's worth of background radiation in 6 minutes. Thorne's last written words were not a goodbye, they were a formula. He was trying to calculate the distance between the world we see and the world that sees us. He was an expert in fluid dynamics, a man who understood how water moves, but he did not understand how reality flows. The grieving investigator finds a file buried in the root directory. It is titled The Pattern. It is a map of the North Atlantic, but the continents are gone. It is just a series of interconnected nodes, a web of lines that Thorne believed were the true architecture of the ocean. He didn't vanish into the sea, he vanished into the geometry. The final reconstruction suggests that the 80 gigabytes of recordings were not just evidence, but a beacon. Thorne knew the boat would be found. He knew the data would be analyzed. He wanted us to see the violet fringe. He wanted us to hear the heartbeat in the hull. The mountains don't explain why, but the evidence demands we ask. Why was the cabin pressurized? Why were the locks engaged from the outside? Why did the thermal imaging show a heat signature in the bunk 3 hours after the salvage crew boarded an empty boat? The case remains open. The aura remains silent. The secret is not in what was lost, but in what was left behind. A man who was prepared for everything found the one thing no one can prepare for, the end of the map. No signal, no trace. Just the memory of a man who sailed beyond the edge of the frame. The mountains keep their secrets. The sea keeps the rest. Turn off the screen. Walk away. But remember the violet fringe. It is still there, waiting. Continuing forensic expansion for Section 5, Metadata of Absence. Every file has a signature. A camera leaves a thumbprint of its sensor's heat. On the night of July 6th, the metadata suggests the Nikon D70 was operating at a temperature of 400 degrees Fahrenheit, yet the plastic casing found in 2015 shows no signs of melting. This is the forensic paradox. The grieving investigator zooms in on the grain of the images. Within the noise, the random pixels generated by a struggling sensor, there are shapes. Thorne spends 40 gigabytes of storage trying to enhance these shapes. He uses edge detection algorithms. He uses Fourier transforms. He is a man obsessed with the resolution of the unknown. At 9:14 p.m., he writes, "The noise is not random, it is a broadcast." Imagine the focus required to sit in a cabin while the world outside dissolves, calmly documenting the failure of your own reality. Thorne was not a victim of the sea, he was a volunteer for the truth. He describes the water not as a liquid, but as a data stream. This is where the narrative shifts from the physical to the metaphysical. The aura was no longer a boat, it was a cursor moving across a screen of infinite black. Section 6, the log of the mundane. Between the cosmic revelations, Thorne records the trivial. 7:02 a.m., made coffee. 8:19 a.m., tightened the starboard stay, 9:44 a.m. Notice the reflection in the kettle is delayed by 3 seconds. These small fractures in the mundane are more terrifying than the grand anomalies. A man watches his own reflection blink after he does. He doesn't scream. He checks the clock, he checks the battery, he remains the expert. This is the quote 37. His very rationality prevents him from fleeing because he believes if he can just collect enough data, the anomaly will become a law. But the sea doesn't have laws, it has appetites. The quote 38 notes that Thorne's handwriting in the scanned PDFs remains perfectly legible until the very end. No tremors, no panic, just a methodical record of his own departure. Section 7, the final descent. The quote reaches the center of the anomaly. The thermal imaging data shows the ocean temperature hitting absolute zero, yet the water remains fluid. This is a scientific impossibility. Thorne records a video of himself pouring water from a flask. It doesn't fall, it rises. He watches it hit the ceiling and crystallize into the same geometric patterns he saw on the deck. The gravity is pivoted, he whispers. The slow burn pacing mimics the final hours, 11:58 p.m., 11:59 p.m. The clock stops. The recordings continue. Section 8, the reconstruction of the last hour. We see the final movement of the man. He is calm. He goes to the Pelican case. He places the drives inside. He is protecting the story. He is ensuring that the justice through memory can occur. He looks at the camera. For the first time, he doesn't look like an oceanographer. He looks like a man who has seen the finish line. He walks to the companionway. He opens the hatch. The light that pours in is not sunlight. It is the light of a world without filters. Section 9, the empty boat. The quote 43 drifts for 3,000 days. It is a ghost ship in a digital age. The satellite logs show the boat appearing and disappearing from radar over 500 times. It was there, then it wasn't. It was a glitch in the Atlantic. Section 10, the moral warning. When we find these items, the backpack, the shoes, the 80 gigabytes of recordings, we think we are looking at a tragedy. We are actually looking at a mirror. Elias Thorne was the best of us, prepared, intelligent, brave, and he vanished because he dared to look at the grain of the world. The mountains don't explain why. They don't have to. They just stay. The aura is back in the harbor, but Elias Thorne is still out there, etched into the metadata of a sea that never ends. No signal, no trace, just the silence of 80 gigabytes of truth. The forensic timeline of the final drive reveals one last terrifying detail. Between the last video and the power failure of the system, a folder was created. It contains 10,000 empty text files. Each one is named with a different date in the future. The last file is dated August 14th, 2015, the day the boat was found. Thorne didn't just sail into the void, he waited for us there. The Boa quote 45 realizes the 80 gigabytes wasn't a log of what happened to Elias Thorne, it was a countdown. As the aura sits in its final berth, its sensors continue to ping. They are receiving data from a source that doesn't exist. Metadata from the deep, frames from the other side. Imagine you are standing on that dock. You reach out to touch the hull. You expect cold carbon fiber. You feel warmth. You feel a pulse. The mountains keep their secrets. The sea keeps its secrets. And Elias Thorne? He is the secret now. No signal, no trace, just silence. The evidence is complete. The case is closed. But the recording is still running. Somewhere, in the dark, we are the ones being watched. We are the data now. Refining for length, Section 11, the acoustic reconstruction. The 80 gigabytes of data was not just visual and environmental. It contained nearly 15 gigabytes of pure hydrophone audio, raw, uncompressed recordings of the ocean floor as the aura drifted over the deepest trenches of the Atlantic. In the years following the discovery, acoustic forensic analysts began to isolate specific frequencies. They expected the sound of tectonic plates or the calls of unknown cephalopods. Instead, they found the sound of a voice. It wasn't Thorne's. It was a collective resonance, a harmonic overlap that sounded like thousands of voices speaking in unison, yet perfectly out of phase. Thorne's metadata notes on these files are brief. Quote 47. According to the timestamps, these recordings were made while the aura was supposedly in a box, quote 48, where no wind or current should have existed. Thus, quote 49 now listens to these tapes through high-end studio monitors, searching for a single recognizable word. At 4:22 a.m. on the 9th day of the disappearance, the voices stop. There is a minute of total digital silence, 0 decibels, a physical impossibility in a moving boat. Then a single click, the sound of a pen hitting a table, Thorne's pen, found in 2015 exactly where the sound originated. This is the iterative forensic reveal. The boat was recording the future sound of its own investigation. Section 12, the chemical analysis of the residue. When the salvage crew first entered the galley, they noted a fine iridescent dust covering every surface. It wasn't sea salt. It wasn't mold. Lab results from the Lisbon Forensic Institute described the substance as a non-terrestrial crystalline structure that reacted to light by changing its atomic weight. Thorne had been breathing this. He had been eating off plates covered in it. His logs from the middle of the drives mention a sweetness in the air and a thinning of the skin. The expert victim was being chemically altered by the very environment he was trying to categorize. He writes about the dust in his final journal entry. It's not settling on the boat is growing out of it. The irony is absolute. The carbon fiber, the pinnacle of human engineering, was being overwritten by a biological code that didn't belong to our biosphere. Section 13, the visual glitches. On the third hard drive, there are 4 hours of video that appear to be corrupted. The screen is filled with green and purple blocks of digital noise. However, when the quote 56 applied a quote 57 filter, the noise resolved into images of the cabin. But it wasn't Thorne's cabin. It was the cabin as it appeared in 1912, then 1945, then 2025. The aura was acting as a lens, capturing the same physical space across different points in time. Thorne is visible in the corner of one frame, looking directly at a version of himself that hasn't been born yet. This is the open loop question. If time is a circle in the void, did Thorne ever actually leave? Or is he still stepping off that stern over and over into a sea that has no beginning and no end? Section 14, the final warning to the viewer. Imagine you are sitting in your room right now. You think you are safe because you are on land. You think the ocean is something over there. But Thorne's data suggests that the ocean is not water. It is the baseline. We are the anomaly. The 80 gigabytes of recordings were left behind not to solve a mystery, but to warn us that the map is a lie. The mountains don't explain why. The sea doesn't explain how. It just waits for the next expert, the next prepared soul, the next victim who believes they can measure the infinite. The final file is not an image or a sound. It is a piece of code. If you run it, your screen goes black. You see your own reflection. And for a second, just a second, the reflection doesn't blink when you do. No signal, no trace, just the violet fringe, just the silence. This is the truth of Elias Thorne. This is the truth of the aura. The recordings have ended. The countdown is at 0. The sea is calling. Don't look at the horizon. It's looking at you. Section 15, the archive of the lost. The investigation concluded that the aura was not just a boat found at sea, but a data dump from another dimension. The 80 gigabytes represents a transfer of information that should not be possible. Every time the drives are plugged in, the metadata changes. A file that was 2 megabytes yesterday is 4 megabytes today. The evidence is growing. The grieving investigator has stopped looking at the screen. He knows that to look is to be seen. He knows that Elias Thorne is not dead, but archived. The mountains keep their secrets. The sea keeps its secrets. And now the hard drives keep ours. The end is not a destination. It is a recording. No trace, no hope, just data, just the deep. Silence, only silence.